And so that's live. Period. Okay, so hi, welcome to NASFiC, the National Science Fiction Convention, virtually. This panel is on the effects of COVID on the movie and television industry. I've got a description here. How will the film and television industries be changed by COVID as the industry shifts in response to quarantine and travel limitations? How do those decisions impact the creatives within their ranks and the culture of storytelling? What will be different and what opportunities lie ahead? My name is Stephen Gould. I'm a novelist, best known for my Jumper book series. The first one, which was made into the 2008 movie, and the third one, which was made into the YouTube television series, Impulse. I'd like to go ahead and get Brandon and Jay to go ahead and introduce themselves and talk about their context.
Cool. Brandon, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure. I'll do that. Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon Wilson. I am a filmmaker. I've been making films off and on for a couple decades now. I went to UCLA Film School after going there for undergrad. I have worked in the industry in a variety of sort of, grunt level places, both production assistant, worked at the studios, in various offices. And then I left the film industry to teach full time. I taught with LA Unified School District for 12 years, English and film occasionally. And for about 2 years now, about 2 years ago, I transitioned to higher ed. So now I teach a couple classes at UCLA. I just wrapped up in a class on editing there, online classes at Long Beach Community College. They're all online now, obviously, but these were always online before the fall. And also at Columbia College Hollywood. I have written, directed, produced, edited 2 feature films. One of them is on Vimeo called Sepulveda. I'm on Twitter all the time as Genius Bastard. One word, Genius Bastard. It's a joke. It's not. I don't think of myself that way. And either way. My wife is currently in film school, so while I'm not in the middle of planning a production right now, I just finished a script, but I'm not planning a production, but I'm seeing through her a lot of what's been going on and how this is all affecting. So that's how I come to this, and happy to be here. Thanks.
Cool. I'm Jay Holtham. I started off as a playwright. I lived in New York for a long time, writing plays and producing theater in New York, mostly with the Ensemble Studio Theater. I moved to LA in about 2015 or so, permanently, and to pursue TV and film. And after that, I worked on Pitch, on Fox, Cloak and Dagger, on Freeform, now on Hulu, and I'm currently on Supergirl. And that's the project I was working on. We were in the room last year when it all went down.
That's great. I'm so glad you guys are here. I would like to mention that Chris Garcia, the guest of honor of the convention, was supposed to be on this panel, but as people are probably already aware, had to evacuate his home because of fires in California, and is not going to be joining us, sadly. And hopefully they will be okay, and they will have a home to go back to. Fingers crossed. I wouldn't mind jumping on that last bit about when you were in the room. So actually, maybe we could talk a little bit about what the room is. A lot of people have heard about the writer's room, but until I experienced one myself, I really had no idea um, how how immersive and how familial it becomes, and how, or in some horror cases, how apparently, well, also like families that may be abusive families, but but that it is incredibly, both intense experience and actually, an experience I count way up there in my creative career. Would either of you like to talk about what a writer's room is and what it does in what's pretty much the pre-production phase of a project?
I mean, for us on a network show, the writers' room goes through pre and during production. I mean, in the most basic, the writers' room for a TV show is where the writing happens. We're a writing staff. Most of the credits you see at the top of a show are writers. And they gather. We're lucky in that it's sort of regular, like work-a-day work in a way. You show up every day at 10, you work until 6, you talk about story, you break story. Like you say, it's very immersive. You're basically in a room with the same 10 people for about 10 hours a day, talking mostly endlessly. And then eventually you have episodes. You go off and you write your episode, and then if you're lucky enough to be on a show that lets you, you go off and produce your episode on set, and then you come back to the room, and the whole process starts all over again.
That's cool. So, do you have anything to add there, Brandon, about when?
No, I was just thinking to ask Jay how. I mean, obviously, the writing room, it's a completely different dynamic, and people talk a lot about that now that it's Zoom. So what's your experience about shifting that room to a Zoom where talking over one another is suddenly not really a thing you can do,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Zoom room is tough. It's sort of different for us, and I think for a lot of the world, it all happens sort of suddenly. LA locked down, or at least started locking down a little bit earlier than other places in the country. So pretty much, I went to work at my office because normally, we gather in a physical room. We all have our own offices, but we sit in a room, and it's in a building. It's our writer's room is just over there in Burbank in California. So one day I went into the office, and then the next day they were like, "Nope, now we're doing Zoom." And we were in a Zoom room for about 2 months, and we're going back next week. And it's definitely different. The upsides are we spend a little less time in the room because we get a bit more focus. There's a little less sort of digression. We're actually a little more sort of like on task. And a thing that helps with that is our showrunners, my bosses, the people who run the room. They are much more present when we're in an office for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, because show running is a big job. They wind up being pulled out to go to meetings and to talk to execs and the production company and the network and the studio and this and that and the other and the actors, and they worry about production. And so there are days where we don't see them at all. And when we're in the Zoom room, obviously they're there and they're present. And a lot more present than those other times. So we actually get kind of a lot more done. But it's also a lot of screen time and a lot of focus. All the things that is true about Zoom. You gotta sort of be worried about how you look and sort of be worried about your poker face. And it is a little bit harder to sort of communicate to another human being via this format. But we're doing it. It's the way it's going to be for at least the rest of the year.
I was reading, because so much of what happens in a room, and I was in one for 5 months, as I was telling them, digressions about talking about all sorts of things, and sometimes it can swing back into the actual project, but I saw that in some cases, rooms were actually starting off their meetings with people talking about the wacky and crazy thing that happened to them. And to just give a little taste of that interpersonal, that's not work.
Right.
on the project. Yeah.
Right. And even when you're working on the project, like, when I was on pitch, one of the other writers told a story about uh, told a story about a hookup that she'd had, where she went to her car the next day. The guy walked her to her car, and her side mirror was destroyed. And it became very clear very quickly. The guy understood exactly who did it and exactly why. And that's something that wound up literally in an episode of Pitch, just because we were talking about it, and it becomes a very, like I said, you're in a room with a lot of people, you're talking a lot, you get to know people really quickly, and you wind up, a lot of it does wind up funneling into the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is a aspect, and obviously production meetings between things like set design, location scouting, casting, all those things have almost certainly moved into Zoom and other forms of remote. Obviously, a lot of those people were picking up the phone in the, before this period as well, for especially things like figuring out locations, figuring out travel, figuring out all that sort of thing. But you can take what's happening in the writer's room, which is actually, now I showed up in the writer's room having no idea what a writer's room is, in a button-down shirt. Not for the creatives. The creatives do not wear button-down shirts. Mostly creatives wear t-shirts, right? And that was, I learned that really quick. But besides that, the suits, as they say, are often are also, I'm sure, doing this kind of thing. I had 5 days on a set for the filming of the pilot of Impulse, the TV series I had, and there were 105 people on that. Well, the one day I asked, how many people are on set? And it varies, obviously, as things have to be done and various things have to be set up. But it was 105 people in freezing weather in Ontario, sub freezing weather in Ontario. And as I was telling Brendan, 15 people in a tiny little craft services trailer going in to get some hot chocolate and stuff. There's no possible way you're not gonna communicate a disease. So I know that there are very few shows that are actually filming during this time period. And they're doing things like either trying to create a bubble, like the NBA, failed. Well, they sort of did. Or like they'll put everyone in quarantine for 14 days and then start production with regular testing and preventing outside mixing. Have you guys heard anything about any of those kinds of projects?
Yeah, so I can say that while I'm not currently in production with anything, as I mentioned, that my wife is just started the second year of film school. So literally, when in February I was driving around town, helping her location scout. And this is a piece that's set mostly at a public parking lot. So we're driving all over the place. She's got her actors. She's doing auditions. We're doing all this the sort of conventional way. So, and even though my wife's in film school, she's worked on a couple of features with me, and she co-directed the second one. So she's not exactly brand new. So she's getting excited. She's got her cast, she's got her script, and she's getting all this stuff. She's going to shoot it as well as direct it. And then it comes and it starts happening. And my wife, she's the relationship optimist, and I would say realist. She would say pessimist, and I'm just sitting here like, so honey, this is not. She's like, if we go real fast, maybe we can beat it. And I'm like, this is good. They're gonna shut you down really soon, and they did. So it was really hard for her because she wanted to get in there and get it through. But yeah, so she was shut down, and so she was ready to go. I mean, probably I think late March we were going to shoot the first episode of the web series, and so nothing's been shot. She has her classes moved to Zoom. She's done some work with the actors via Zoom, and everyone's just kind of in this holding pattern. Right now, I've looked at her school's material and as like protocols for shooting, and it sounds like they're going with sort of the zone model, where there's like, it's kind of like, think of it like concentric circles, and the circle in the middle is zone A, and that's where the actors are acting, and that's like, as you try to keep that as clean as possible, have only the actors entering zone A, and then you have zone B around it, and that's a little more relaxed, but still, I mean, the big thing is you're just not going to be able to have the same number of people on a crew that, like you used to. I mean, that's one big immediate change, is that crews are probably going to get smaller, and that's of course going to have some real ramifications as far as working in the industry, because there are some jobs that'll be created, I think, by all of this, like the PA who just spends the whole day wiping everything down, because that's going to be someone's job, is just to constantly wipe down services and wipe down everything. But yeah, it sounds like smaller crews, protocols about how to handle masks, about how the actors' masks are to be handled in between takes and things like that, or when they're going on camera. So that's kind of what's going on. I don't think she has a date yet for shooting, but the hope is that it's going to happen fairly soon. Then there's also costs that are going to be incurred by productions for, especially smaller productions, for testing. I know that SAG has certain things that they want to see in place as far as people being tested. So that is sort of the immediate thing that I'm seeing now, just from her experience as a film student. And myself, I was writing a script with a friend, and that writing a feature with someone actually, and I'm sure many of us have had that thought that in many ways this happening now is somewhat optimal, because so many things are able to go forward, versus if this was 2000 and how many things would just be at a whole total standstill and couldn't move at all. So yeah, my friend and I are just writing, without meeting, and we Zoom every other week, and we finish the first draft. And now when I find him 5 minutes, I'll read the draft and we'll keep going. And he is on Snowfall, and so he's dealt with the virtual writers room situation there as well. So that's how what I've been seeing as far as right now, and that's what I've gotten some glimpses as to what it's going to look like when it resumes. And yeah, those are a few of the things that I've seen so far.
I suspect we're going to see things like policies where you're not supposed to, like cameramen, camera assistants and cameramen are going to be literally the only, and they sort of like this now, but the only ones who touch their equipment. Sound guys are going to be the only ones who touch their equipment, and and they're going to be the zone, as you say, a zone format that helps keep, you're not going to have other people picking up their equipment to help them, or move their equipment because they're annoyed with where they left it.
Right, and people were, exactly, if you've been on a set, you already know that that's a thing, right? Touching other people's equipment, or even if you're not in that department. So it's only just going to become even more so of a thing now. Like, really, you don't touch anything that you're not, that isn't yours, and like, be very careful. And I see a question here: labor rights perspective, will the average worker in the industry be better off or worse, or a lot worse? That's a great question, and I don't know. And to be honest, I think that if you follow me on Twitter, I complain a lot about what I call Hollywood's Gilded Age sort of labor practices, where that have come a little ways, I think, in the last 20 years. but I remember being in film school and hearing stories about people falling asleep behind the wheel, coming home and from a shoot and dying. I have fallen asleep behind the wheel on the freeway on music videos where I worked 20 hours the first day, got 7 hours of turnaround, and then worked another 18 hours the next day. So yeah, and those are of course non-union, and that's like the Wild West. But so right, that's a major thing, is what is this going to do? And I think obviously with the sort of the break, the disruption, which is the word of our era, the disruption in the routine, I think it's going to be interesting to see how much people can sort of refashion normal into being something that's maybe a little more worker friendly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to, maybe I'm not that such a pessimist after all to think that could happen, but I do think that shorter hours are going to happen. You know, I don't think you're going to be seeing people on sets as long as they used to be, because again, that's just, you know, it's more of a risk. I think we're shooting more for 10, and that's probably sort of been the trend of late, you know, to sort of shorten hours. I'm not sure that it'll ever be like, you know, sort of French hours where it's really like eight and you know, 8 if you're lucky. But you know, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I know I heard a story from James Cameron himself about his experience with the British film people during Terminator 2, where they had some very interesting ideas about what was appropriate to work, and he had some very bad behavior himself. It was very interesting how explicitly he was telling how badly he had behaved as part of that process. But he was very honest and straightforward about that. But I just got the Zoom room chat up. I didn't have it up before now, and there were a couple of other questions that I'm supposed to be the one watching that, so I apologize. Earlier, Bob Devney asked, how will Hollywood react to the death of a major star? And I'm not sure that, I mean, do they mean from COVID, or do they, because major stars have died mid-production. Many times. Everything from poor, you know, Vic Morrow, was it, who had the helicopter incident and so on. So I'm not sure we need to jump into that one. I think it's going to be pretty much the way they handle those kind of incidents. I don't think it's going to be a difference, even if it is a death from COVID. There may be some liability stuff that happens.
Yeah, I think that's paramount on everyone's mind, right?
Yeah.
That they don't want, you know, somebody huge to get it and die, but they also know that like there are tremendous forces right now coming to bear on the industry to get back to work. I mean, people want to see movies. You know, everyone does. There's very few people. There may be some naysayers who are like, shut it down. But I think the industry obviously wants to work because they want to, you know, they want to generate income. People more than ever are desperate for content because we can't go out as much. So I think that, and I mean, it would be a terrible thing for that to happen, obviously, but I do think that kind of motivates people to be very careful. You know, and we'll see. I mean, I do feel like unless there is something really egregious in terms of that, the person being exposed to something, unless it's really egregious, I think people will probably say it's a terrible thing and this is awful and accept that this is the world we live in, and probably not want to burn down the whole industry for taking the chance. Because I feel like where you can just feel people really want to get back to work, and people really do want to see, they want content. People are, I think, a little bit freaked out about 2021 just being this kind of wasteland with just shows that look like this right here, you know?
Right.
So Jay, what do you have?
I mean, my perspective on it, exactly. I mean, I agree 100% with you guys. You know, obviously, most of the sort of planning and systems that are being put in place are designed to essentially prevent that exact circumstance. I mean, I've heard of the zone thing is what I hear most places are doing, and the basic idea is to limit the contact for the actors as much as possible, to move anything that can be done when the actors are not on set needs to happen before they get on set, reduce the number of people there. But a lot of it right now is also, it's all in a sort of flux state. Everyone is unsure. I think Brandon is exactly right that there's tremendous pressure to get back to work. I mean, corporations need they're paying for all this stuff. They need
Mm-hmm.
content. They want content. People do want to get back to work. People need to get back to work. Crew people, their jobs are not guaranteed. They don't have insurance. Everyone is eager to be working. But we're also all sort of aware of no one knows how long it's going to be safe for, what exactly any of these things are what's going to happen as soon as someone tests positive for COVID. Is the whole production shut down? Is that person like, how do we navigate that? And there's a lot of it that is still sort of unknown. I've heard of a couple places that have started. I know SWAT started shooting here in LA a couple weeks ago. Vancouver, there was a long sort of negotiation with the Canadian crews in Vancouver that seems to have resolved itself. So Vancouver should be starting up soon. I know we're supposed to go back into production towards the end of September is our goal. But every time we get a date for anything, it's always like, but this is
Right.
Dependent on,
we're giving you this date, but anything can change between now and then. And so we'll see. I mean, and not to mention, like big crowd scenes. How are those going to work? What are going to be the dynamics that we're going to be facing once we're up there, or once we're actually shooting? Because as Brandon said, I mean, that's the thing that struck me when I went to set. It's an army. It's a literal army of human beings and human bodies in close contact, and it's going to be really hard to try to rearrange our thoughts and rearrange all of our practices to fewer people on set, fewer people in some ways on screen, and how do we still tell the stories we want to tell?
so another question that came up is about, goes back to the writer's room and about, is there, sort of talked about this a little, but can a writer's room effectively go virtual without losing some creative heat? Um, and I think you may have addressed that in that you're analyzing how you went from, you may not have had all the digressions, but you actually gained some focus
Hmm.
on getting to stories. Um,
I
any
mean,
thoughts?
it's hard to tell because we're still sort of in the middle of it. Like I said, we were in the room breaking and writing the beginning of the sixth season. We then went to a Zoom room, and then production also shut down for us a little early, a couple weeks early. We wound up not being able to quite finish our finale and having to adjust our plan for season six to some degree. And so, with all of those variables and all of that in the air, it's hard to sort of tell like where are things landing and what's sticking and what's working. And we don't have the sort of immediate feedback of the actors and being on set, because normally, uh, since we're a network show, we're writing things and then within a week of it being done, we're on set shooting it. So we get a sense of like, oh, okay, this is working, this is not working. So it's we're right in the middle of it, and it's again. There are so many unknowns, and there's so many parts of this that are still up in the air. Like I still like my room. The room is great. I think we're flowing well and doing good work. It's definitely different, but I think it's going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was in a room for 5 months, we had literally 20 feet of whiteboard along one room that was floor to ceiling. We
Hmm.
had another 10 feet on another wall, and then we had three rolling whiteboards. Have you found any of the tools of Zoom are helping you replace that kind of, the note card, all the different ways of
We
dealing with that stuff? Yeah.
we mostly just use Google Docs, and the good thing about a Google Doc is that you can edit it in real time. Each person can edit it in real time and keep
Mm-hmm.
track. Our writer's assistant works and writer's PA work really hard, keeping them clean and keeping them still doing their notes. So all of that process is the same. It isn't, you don't get the good, not the good feeling. You don't have the simplicity of walking into the room and just being like, okay, what's on the board? Okay, that's what people have been discussing or where we landed. But it's a little more sort of time intensive to click out of Zoom and click open the Google Doc and look at the Google Doc. But that's what the money is for, and that's what we're doing. And I think it's still working. But that's how we're recreating it. We're recreating it. We haven't found a good digital, or no one's created sort of a digital whiteboard that is truly functional for the writers' room. So Google Docs is what we're working with for now.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question or suggestion that possibly we're going to be seeing more outdoor shooting. But literally, this can affect the writer's room. Literally, they're going to be saying, we don't want you to write anything in a tight, stuffy, unventilated room. That's an interesting, so that is a possibility. They're wondering if there actually might be more Westerns, but I'm not so sure that that per se may be.
Everyone will be in spacesuits. So everything will be gravity. Everyone just in their own suit that they have prepared. Because that could be. There's another thing that I'm sure we're going to see some of that. And also I saw in there about I think there will be a lot of more things outdoors. As far as the pandemic being worked into narratives, I think that's where you'll see the big difference between TV and movies. Because I think TV, like Insecure, is going to have to kind of deal with this. If you're a contemporary show, you're going to have to deal with the fact that for months people didn't go out. And if you're Better Call Saul, then no, you're set in the past. It's not. You just kind of keep going, and you have to make your adjustments. And more scenes in the desert where people are meeting and talking there, and less in the office. But movies, I'm not sure you're going to see as much pandemic. You might see a couple of horror things maybe, but my sense is that movies will just kind of pick up and just kind of make it pretend let's just move on and pretend this isn't happening, or maybe just the slightest sort of gestures towards the new reality. But my sense is TV is going to have to really deal with it and embrace it because of just the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, it's still really up in the air in the conversations that I have with our writers and what I see online and what I sort of talk to with people in little groups or whatever. And we're all still like really torn. And in a way, again, we're all sort of waiting to see how it shakes out. Like there are definitely shows that are going to have to deal with the pandemic. I know This Is Us has already said that they're doing it, and Grey's Anatomy, so shows like that. There may be shows like I can definitely imagine Insecure just sort of skipping over it and just saying like, oh, there's a crazy thing that happened in the past. We're just moving on, depending on when they start shooting and what's going on in the world at the time. Because there's another dimension to all this that is not necessarily part of this conversation, but there's also the like massive amounts of sort of political upheaval and an uprising and all of the foment of the time that has aligned with the pandemic. It's all a question of what's going to wind up actually in the material and what the audience is going to have a stomach for. We don't know that in 4 months, God willing, if this is sort of, we're on the actual downside of this and it's sort of wrapping up, we don't know if people are going to want to watch a thing about a pandemic in 4 months, or if they're going to be like, let's all just pretend that didn't happen and move on. So it's we're not sure. We're just not sure.
And I also think that the election seems to also, I think, be the other thing everyone's just waiting on.
Yeah, exactly.
We're waiting to see how that goes. If this is if we are on the eve of a second Trump term, then that changes the equation versus a new president, new administration. So that's I think the other thing we got to hold our breath for. And everyone's
so we're right now at 15 minutes for the thing, and I think it might be a good time to start taking a little more from the audience. Kathleen asked, do you think production on shows will differ depending on the country of location? Canada seems to have a better response to COVID than the US, and so contagion risk may be less. Does Vancouver have a advantage over LA? I'd like to just say that Avatar 2 and 3 are doing their photographic shoots in New Zealand. And there's a country that has its act together about COVID. That's pretty significant. But go ahead and respond to that if you could.
I mean, we shoot in Vancouver, and that is like, it definitely has the advantage of they did have their shit much more together. And like I said, we've just sort of worked it out with their unions about the number of people and all of that. And it seems like it's going to be really possible for us to begin close to or on the date that we're talking about, and hopefully not have to worry about an outbreak. The big sort of the disadvantage of Vancouver versus shooting somewhere more locally is that anyone going there from the US, because we don't have our crap together, is going to have to wait in a 2-week quarantine. And that means that sort of trickles down to us as writers, that we have to lock scripts much earlier. We have to have a much clearer idea of who we're casting and where that person is going to be coming from. Just last year when we were doing it, we had it wasn't that it was all loosey goosey, but we were able to say, oh, we just heard that Sean Astin wants to come back for another episode. So let's just write a part for him and we'll fly him up to Vancouver and he'll do a couple days and come down. And those days are gone for the year. Like, we are not really down in a place. We're not going to be in that place. We're going to be in a place of, we have to know exactly who's going, exactly where they're coming from. Are they going to be Canadian? And if they're going to be American, we have to build in a 2-week quarantine before they're going to be on set. And so that will change some stuff for us, definitely.
Okay. One of the things that split this topic for me into two major things back when I was first thinking about it. And that is, a lot of what we have been talking about is the responses to how the industry is changing during the pandemic. Do either of you have any feeling about what these changes have done that are going to persist even to the point where we have a working vaccine and herd immunity? What sort of things that have changed now are going to persist in the future?
Jay, you probably have a better sense of this than I do, Jay. But because what I'm wondering is how is it going to be possible for someone who lives in Kansas City or Little Rock to now is a career in Hollywood, depending, of course, on what you do, is that now much more doable? Well, let's say you're a writer, is living out of town, is that now going to be much more attainable? How much is this going to lead to the decentralization of the film industry? Where
Right. And I think there'll be some of that. I mean, I definitely think that like Zoom rooms will be much more possible and much more feasible. It's, as usual, it will really depend on the showrunner and where the showrunner is and what the showrunner wants to do in order to sort of figure that out. I think also there'll be some different thinking about, I'm sure, honestly, it seems like a small thing, but I'm pretty sure craft services won't return to the way that it used to be, where there's sort of a big buffet that people can sort of pick at. I mean, I think a lot of these sort of crew changes on set will probably wind up becoming relatively permanent, just because, again, it's probably going to be more cost effective for the network and the studios to have less people and to do more shift work. And it's also, we're always going to be sort of aware that there's a pandemic possible, that like that kind of closeness is not necessarily healthy. So I think there's going to be some of those changes may last longer. I think the Zoom rooms will probably last the longest because we've already basically been informed we will be the last people to return to a physical location anywhere. I don't know if it'll be easier to start your career in LA, outside of LA. And I think it will definitely be easier that if I wanted to move to New York or move to Chicago at this point, it would be a lot easier than it would have been last year. Last year, it would have definitely meant, oh, you got to leave your job. And this year is probably a bit more like, we can figure out a way to make it work.
In industry in general, industry, business in general, despite years and years of saying that teleworking was just not a thing our company is going to do, they've found enormous savings and efficiencies, especially with things like commuting. In LA, of course, you really see that the cost of a commute to go to a place. And so, yeah, I think that particular aspect is there. I'm wondering to what extent post-production, especially effects, because are going to be capable of being done remotely, where you have server farms that people can remotely telepresent into, because it does take some fairly high-powered technology, and that's constant, because no matter how good we get at doing effects and animation and so on in the current technology, they want to keep ramping it up. So it's not always going to be a case where you're going to be able to do it at home, though small filmmakers can do immense and great things with fairly off-the-shelf equipment nowadays, without first busting the bank like they would have had to. One of the questions we got was, is animation an option for making movies today? And I'm wondering if they mean by that doing animation in the sense of cartoon, or animation in the sense of actually replicating real world physical appearance.
I mean, it's a little bit of...
Go ahead. Yeah.
I would say there's a little bit of sort of both things happening. Like, there are definitely a lot of people who have traditionally been in live action who are definitely looking at the animated space and saying, okay, maybe I can shift this project that way, or get staffed on whatever, or move it to something animated, which will be interesting since animation has such a much longer lead time than live action. You know, animated projects come out a year or two after because of the whole animation process. So we won't really know how much of that is happening for a couple of years. You know, super quickie animation like they did with The Blacklist and a couple of the other shows last fall is a stopgap, but it's not going to really replace full-on animation. But then there is the thing they used for on the other side. There's the thing they used in The Mandalorian about the virtual backdrops, and that I think we will definitely see a lot more of. And that's really interesting, where you can have a screen that can change a photorealistic image or an actual image of whatever that so you can do you could do an outdoor western entirely on a soundstage. And that may be, especially if you could seed some extras in the background, that may be a lot of what we see.
Right. I think a lot of people talked about that, about shifting to animation, but Jay, I think, yeah, exactly. It's like, yes, with animation, it gives you a lot of things in terms of not having to shoot. And of course, now people are, and I'm sure people, A-list talent probably all have had studios put in their homes at this point for this kind of thing, what we're doing now, or whatever, someplace to securely record themselves. So yeah, that's the upside, but right, then the downside is it takes so long, and it is a very different medium, and animation really requires a different approach to storytelling, and I think people kind of get that and don't want to do something that looks very clearly like, oh yeah, they just animated it to get it out. So that is something that people talked a lot about. Probably, I would imagine it's not going to happen very much, except maybe now somebody has a script in there now going through it and thinking like, well, I can do this period piece thing. What if we do, it may, we may not see that for quite some time, but so yeah. And then there was the question about World War II. Yeah, I can't think of, and I was thinking about.
So let's go ahead and restate the question so that people know. So the question was, is Hollywood going to handle this to the same extent that the same way they handled the disruptions from World War II? And I think it's not quite the same issues when you took so many of your crew, your active crews, and your actors and your writers, and you actually sent them to other parts of the world to fight Nazis. It's not quite the same thing as just not having them be able to congregate in the same place now.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not a.
We're at 5 minutes. If anyone in the audience would like to send in one last question, we might have time for one more, but otherwise we're getting to the wrap up stage of things. So go ahead and finish what you were going to say about.
That's the thing, is that this is not really. There's no precedent for what's happening right now, because even in the 1919 pandemic, and I'm by no means an expert on early silent cinema, but clearly the industry was nowhere near the size it was, and I'm sure they had to make some adjustments. They were already a lot of their sound stages already had no roofs to let in light. So, I'm sure there were some accommodations had to be made, but now it's just such a bigger enterprise with so many more people that, this is just literally unprecedented and nothing that anyone ever really thought about So World War II, right. You're going to lose some talent who's overseas fighting, but otherwise the production process itself is not really hampered. You're just maybe a little shorthanded, but then, you find other people to do it. And here, as opposed to just like, you simply you're going to have to eliminate some production positions and completely change how you do things. So there's no precedent.
Okay. One last question. Any advice for independent filmmakers? I imagine that's in the context of this particular situation, not just plain generic advice.
I would say, I think every, at the risk of quoting Littlefinger, any chaotic situation, there's chaos is a ladder kind of thing. It's like any situation where there is upheaval and disruption is also an opportunity. Some people are going to sort of figure out a way to sort of take advantage of it. For the independent filmmaker, look at what look at what you've got around you. If you're lucky enough to be living with and potting with someone who's also can do things, you might want to think about getting something, creating something that is done under quarantine and under sort of these circumstances. I think that people are going to be sort of curious to see who's going to be creative even now. And in general, for features, I would just say, just something really intimate, and you're going to see a lot of two-handers and three-handers in the next couple of years.
So we're now out of time. I would like to thank very much Jay and Brandon for your excellent insights on all of this, and I really appreciate you guys participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you at the Discord.
All right.
All right.